Hello and happy Tuesday. Nearly forgot what day it was then. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in. Hopefully more will be tuning in over the next couple of minutes. But yeah, you're joining us for a fascinating session today. I'm Alex Cox. I think you know me. But I'm very lucky to be joined by Janet Few of the Devon Family History Society, value partners of Findmypast, a great organisation who, without the hard work of their volunteers, many of the Devon records that you can access on Findmypast would not have been possible. And I think, like many parts of the country, interest in Devon roots has been steadily increasing. We've been having a look at searches performed across our own collections. I think we've seen a roughly about a 50% increase in the number of people trying to find out whether they've got Devon connections. I'm sure some of you watching may well be some of those. And I believe the Devon Family History Society has been seeing something similar. They offer a wide variety of services, and the number of research inquiries they've been receiving over the past year is on the up as well. So yeah, I'm assuming to anybody tuning in today, what are we talking about? Well, we will be trying to bust some of those very tricky Devon brick walls. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions in advance. Janet will be revealing some of the painstaking work that's gone into discovering the stories behind these queries. And depending on how we get on for time, we've got quite a lot to get through today. But if you do have any questions relative to Devon family history, do feel free to pop them in the comments. We've got Ellie watching the comments. So if we don't get to them live, Ellie may be able to point you in the direction of some resources that may help, of which there are many. But anyway, I'm talking too much. Thank you, Janet. It'd be great if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and the Devon Family History Society.
Right, well, yes, hello everybody. My name's Janet Few, as Alex has said, and I'm the fairly recently elected chair of Devon Family History Society. And we have, as you've suggested, seen quite an upsurge in interest in Devon roots recently. We cater not just for those with Devon ancestry, but for anyone who is living in Devon and wanting to trace their family history. We try and set them on the right path as well. But today we're going to concentrate on those who have got Devon ancestry and perhaps are a little bit stuck with it.
And actually, before we dive into the questions, the juicy bit, to anybody who is interested in getting in touch or benefiting from the services you provide, how would they go about doing so?
The best thing to do is to go to our website, which is www.devonfhs.org.uk, and that will guide you through many of the activities and the benefits of becoming a member of our society. We have a very active programme of virtual talks. We're currently doing about 4 a month. Main talks plus small groups where we get together and have informal chats about maybe a group of parishes or some software or DNA and that kind of thing. And we will be continuing with this. This is not something that's going to stop when face-to-face meetings can resume. There are, as Alex mentioned, many images of Devon records on Findmypast, but there are still more in the members area of our website, so you can access those as well. We've got a Facebook group, we've got a message board, and we've got a great many very experienced researchers who can help you with your Devon roots and also other roots as well.
Brilliant. And to anybody who is interested, I do urge you to check out the site. As you can see, it looks very lovely. I just had it up on screen. There's a link at the bottom of your screen there. So yeah, do get in touch. So I think as we've got quite a lot of questions to get through, and I think quite a lot has been discovered, or at least you've got some great tips to point people in a direction that may well help. We might as well dive in. But actually, before we do quickly, I'll have a quick look and see if we've got any comments. As you can see, we've got people watching from all over the shop. Don't be shy. Hello, let us know where you're watching from. We've got people watching in Essex, France, Cornwall, and I'm assuming some of you in Devon as well. But yeah, let's take a look at some of the questions that have come through. So these were submitted in advance. As I said before, if you do have any burning questions, do pop them in the comments. But we'll start off with a question that was submitted by Susan. So Susan said, Jane Pierce, born 1780 in Plymouth. So this is who her query relates to. I cannot find her birth records or parentage. She married a Robert Haybeard, or Haybird, that's a great surname, who I think was born in 1773, but I can't trace his record either. Literally a quick update after that. Found the record, and it does not state whether she was a spinster or not. Her son had Pierce as his middle name, which suggests it was her maiden name. The record has Robert spelt Hebeard. So yeah, thank you, Susan, for sending that in.
Right. Well, I should say that this, or all these queries, have been worked on by a little bit by myself, but predominantly by Sue, who's in charge of our Treehouse research team and is a very experienced researcher. So although we don't have magic wands, we've done the best we can. And in cases where we've had to draw a blank and agree that, yes, this really is a brick wall, I hope that the inquirers will at least feel that we can't do anything either, so maybe they've not missed anything obvious. But this particular one, there's obviously a problem with both these surnames, Pierce and Haybeard, and that is one of variant spellings, and you really have to be quite creative with spelling when you've got names such as this. I mean, Haybeard appears to be spelt in many different ways. I think one of the sons has his name spelt differently on every single census. And often with a surname that starts with an H, we advise looking for it without the H as well, because sometimes the H is dropped. But Sue, so that's sometimes, I don't know that that would particularly help with this one, but in general, that's a tip. Sue believes she's probably found the marriage record that Susan found with a Robert and a Jenny Pierce, who marry at Plymouth St Andrew on the 4th of October in 1807, and that's one of the Devon marriage images on Findmypast. But she's tried and failed to find a Jane Pierce, but looking for Jenny brings up a possibility at the right time, and Jenny is frequently a diminutive for Jane at the sort of period we're talking about. So she's got a Jenny Tothill Pierce, baptised at Plymouth Charles Church on the 9th of May 1779, and her parents were Thomas and Rebecca, and that image too is part of your Devon Baptisms image collection. She's gone back a little bit further to find out that the parents' marriage was in 1777 and that Rebecca's maiden name was Gillard. And Rebecca, the wife of Thomas Pierce, was buried at Plymouth St Andrew in June 1782. And the following year, Thomas marries Jenny Tothill. So the next question, of course, is who is Jenny Tothill? She appears to be Thomas's second wife, and for whom Thomas and Rebecca's firstborn was named. So there's a little bit more work to do around that. Now, the Haybeard, well, please don't try searching for this without ticking that variance box on your Findmypast search screen, because you're going to miss so many entries. And probably the most likely family seems to be a family of Robert Haybeards that come from Yelpton, and the possible birth date that the inquirer Susan has mentioned of 1773, which I suspect she's taken from the age at burial. So this would make him about 34 at that marriage in 1807, but there isn't an obvious baptism in 1773. Obviously, he might not have been baptised as an infant, or indeed at all, but there do appear to be some gaps in the Yelpton records that have made their way through to Findmypast at the moment. But there are some in that gap which are on family search. So there is a baptism in 1770, so a little bit out age-wise. That's Robert, son of Robert and Sarah. And then there's another Robert, son of Robert and Sarah, in 1784, which suggests that the first one has died. So I don't think those burials are perhaps online yet to double check that. But that second Robert survives unmarried until 1867. So this is probably not him. So more likely parents for Robert. And it is important when you're doing these kind of searches not to find something that fits or almost fits and run with it without double checking that that particular Robert hasn't got an alternative future. So clearly you might have honed in on that 1770 Yelpton baptism, and then it doesn't go anywhere, so you need to look for other alternatives. So there is a Robert Haybeard and a Frances Julian who get married in Stoke Damerel in 1761, and the image for that is on Findmypast as well. However, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's right. Their Robert, the first of their children, was actually baptized in 1761. And there is a death for Robert Hibbard Jr. in 1765. Not clear whether that's an adult or a child, because baptism or burials at that date don't seem to specify. And that's another good tip, is to look not just at the entry you're interested in, but the entries either side of it.
Yeah.
To try and establish whether this is a parish clerk who habitually says when it's an infant. And then if they don't say it's an infant, you can presume that it's someone older. But some people don't specify. So, and Sue says she can't see a baptism for a second Robert to the same family, who could potentially be the one who died in 1832. But there are family names appearing here with the children of Robert and Jane a generation later. You know, James, Catherine, Robert, Francis. Slightly less normal than William, John and Mary, but still not particularly unusual. But the advice really is to have a further look at some of these possibilities, because I think some of them may, with a bit more work and looking in perhaps some other records other than parish registers, you might find a few more clues.
So, to kind of summarize, what would be your key kind of learnings or takeaways from digging apart? Obviously, variants are very important. Spellings are
definitely
painfully inconsistent. And that's actually an interesting point you raised as well, about looking at the records either side. That's not something I would have thought to do, actually, just to see whether there was any kind of habits you could pick up in the way parish clerks noted things down that could perhaps inform the decisions you make based off records you're viewing at. But was there anything else to recap on that?
No, I think other than don't just concentrate on the first obvious one, make sure there aren't others that would be equally valid if you look a little bit harder. And actually, your point about looking around, I think that's, I've been doing family history a very, very long time, long before anything was online to look up. So I suppose because you were looking at original registers and often having, because there were no indexes either, having to go through page after page, you automatically looked at the context. There was no other way to do it. Now we don't research like that. We've got these wonderful indexes. We can just home straight in on our person. And actually you miss quite a lot that way. And I think that's something we need to get back into the habit of doing, is scrolling through a few pages either side and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, and actually one of our viewers has commented something similar. So from Chris, this is a great tip as well. Thanks, Chris. Parish register browse is a perfect way of doing that. As you said, we often immediately jump to search. And you can miss things, but most of the collections we have on Findmypast that do contain images, you will often find the browse versions as well, where you can go through page by page by page, and you might find things that you just weren't expecting. You might find other family members. There's also, I also think it's just a nice way of getting a bit of context, because the parish was the community. This would have been their friends, neighbours, people that would have been living alongside them and sharing many of the key defining moments in their lives with them. Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. And thanks to Susan for sending that in. Actually, before we jump on to another one, we did have quite a general question that I wonder whether you could answer. So Matthew Donovan said, basically, his Thomas Pierce married Elizabeth May in 1797 in Stonehouse, struggling to find her christening. So rather than, not to ask specifically in terms of these individuals, but christening records for Devon, where would be the best place to look?
Findmypast, probably.
That's great. Oh, I didn't even know that. That worked out well.
Yes, without, you haven't paid me to say that, but that's probably the starting point. However, particularly with those who appear to be coming from Plymouth, Stoke Damerel, the Stonehouse area, you are very close to the Cornish border. So I would definitely be looking at Cornish records as well. And sadly, you are also in an area where there are a lot of transient people, either to do with the Navy or the Merchant Service or the Army, who are in and out of those places a lot. And so a large number of people who appear to come from those places can come from absolutely anywhere, which is not much help, but it's something to be very much aware of. But certainly don't forget how close you are to that Cornish border.
That's another good tip, actually. Yeah, if you're not familiar with the county you're searching in, or the parish, it's definitely worth looking at a map, isn't it? Because county lines change over time as well. But as you said, if they were living right on the border, it may be worth trying other county collections. Just that might help you close the gap. Cool. Well, in the interest of time, we're going to bring up another question. So this was submitted by Shirley, who said, in 1849, my 3 times great-grandfather, George Moore, married Susan Cockram in Crediton, Devon. I have them living in East Street, Crediton, in 1851. George was a wheelwright, and they have one son, William. By 1861, George is living in Battersea, London, with his 4 children, William, Elizabeth, Sarah, and Emily. He is a widower now, but I cannot find a death for Susan anywhere. So his question is, how does he go about tracking down a death record for the wife?
Right. I mean, well, I suppose the first thing to say is that he's claiming to be a widower, but she may actually not be dead. They may just have parted their ways, and she may be calling herself Susan something else because she's decided she's going to go off with somebody else. But on the assumption that she has actually died, and Sue has looked absolutely everywhere she can for Susan Moore. I mean, you're not dealing with the most uncommon surname in the world, which is a shame. And as far as she can see, there's only one possibility, and that depends on there being some kind of slight error at some point. George and Susan's youngest child, Emily, there's a birth registration for her in North Devon, and that, if you look at the GRO indexes, that will give her mother's maiden name, and her mother's maiden name is Cockram. So it's obviously the right one. There doesn't appear to be a death in Devon between that birth in March 1856 and the beginning of 1861, when George is a widower. Is in London. Yes, there are several deaths for Susan Moores in London, but only one that Sue can find, which could possibly tie up with her birth date. There's another on the Norfolk coast. I mean, that seems very unlikely. There's one in West London Registration District in the December quarter of 1856. And the GRO indexes, which of course do give age at death right back to 1837, whereas other places, ways of looking, don't yet. And that gives her death her age at death as 37. And Sue's advice is to have a look at that death certificate. Is it a mistranscription, a 7 instead of a 2? Because if she was 32, that would have been right. Mm. We haven't been able to find a burial record. That might, again, help. The other thing, of course, is that people were very vague about their ages. And particularly when you were dead, you were relying on whoever the informant was. And by shelling out your £7 for the PDF of that death certificate, you'll see who that informant is. And particularly if it's not her husband or a family member, the chances of the age being absolutely right start to go down. And so ages at death can be really quite flexible. So there's a bit more work to do there, but probably worth a punt on that death certificate, I would think. The other thing to say, of course, is that if, for example, someone's drowned and no body has washed up, and we get this quite a lot in Devon because we've got 2 coastlines.
Yeah.
There is no burial and there is no death certificate. So sometimes there is a mention on a gravestone because someone's been commemorated with someone else, but there won't be a death registration. Equally, if a body is recovered, but several weeks down the line, that's going to be the date on the death certificate, not the date that someone saw them fall off the pier or something like that.
Oh, wow, I didn't realise that.
No, it's really fascinating because that is the first place that they know that person is dead. And equally, I've got a family member who falls in the River Tamar, and the death certificate gives a location 6 miles downstream and 11 days later, because that's where and when the body was found. But if you look at the inquest, it clearly says, well, he was last seen coming out the pub and he should have turned right and he turned left and he ended up in the river. So that's
actually inquest. If you can find some kind of paper trail relating to the inquest, that could be
the inquest is in the newspaper. So that's the inquest itself hasn't survived in that particular instance, but it's very fully reported in the newspapers. So another plug for the access to newspapers, I think.
Well, I think that's just a good general tip anyway, isn't it? If you are struggling to find details of a death, there's no harm in checking the newspapers. You may find, particularly if it was a death in slightly, unfortunate or unusual circumstances or an accident or something, you may well find a report that could be the missing piece of the puzzle. But I guess this is a very common query, isn't it? When you have an ancestor with a relatively common surname like Moore, as a Cox, I know that struggle all too well. There's thousands of us. Making sure you have the right person can be a real challenge. And as you said, certificates are often the only way of doing it, but that can get very expensive very quickly if you find yourself ordering loads of them. So I think your advice on that really is basically just cast the net wide, keep an open mind, check as many other potential overlapping sources as you can, and hopefully eventually you'll find that piece that ties it all together. Brilliant. Well, we will have a look at another question then. So next up we have this is from Emma. Thank you for sending this, Emma. So Emma is wanting to know about Lucy Ann Tidsley, born in 1860 in Soton, Devon, eldest child of Thomas and Elizabeth. So she has Lucy in the 1861 census, and then again on the 1871 census as Lucy Hannah. So a bit of a difference in the middle names there, but cannot find anything at all after that. No marriage record, no death record, knows her siblings moved to South Wales, but not been able to trace Lucy after 1871. So another very common one, the mysterious case of a vanishing ancestor. Vanishing into thin air. They can't have vanished into thin air. They must have gone somewhere.
I think this was one where our magic wands were sadly lacking or broken, but two of us really tried everything we could think of for Lucy, Anna, Hannah, Lucy, whatever, because sometimes people are then known by their middle name. And like Emma, whose inquiry this was, we can't find a marriage and we can't find a death. We've tried looking at the worldwide records. We've looked at the census. We've looked at emigration records, spelling the surname differently, because again, it's a surname that you can mess about with a little bit.
Yeah.
There is, and I'm not advising this as a research method, but there is a tree on Ancestry which claims she got married in 1815 and had a child in 1915. It's not quite as bad as that. Marrying in 1915 and having a child in 1916 when she would have been 55. We feel that's pretty unlikely. And actually, with not a lot of further research, this is a completely different Lucy. It's a Lucy Alma, who was born in 1886. So don't take other people's research seriously.
Yeah.
I went on a little bit of a different track because the 1871 census shows that she's got a sister, Sylvia, which is an even more unusual Christian name than Lucy. So I tried finding the family by searching for her in 1881, hoping they might still all be together. But unfortunately, Sylvia's with an aunt in Dulverton. She's not with her other siblings. And as Emma's mentioned, Sylvia's one of the ones that goes to Monmouthshire. So that didn't help. But as a technique, it might have worked. It just didn't in this instance. And if you look at the places of birth of Lucy and her siblings, they move about all over the place. But because she is called Lucy and not Mary or Elizabeth, there is another technique. And also because she's born in Topsham and not Lambeth or Hackney or somewhere. I actually looked in the 1881 census without a surname. So I looked for all women born between 1858 and 1862 in Topsham. Okay. And I didn't even put any name in at that point. There were two Lucys. And so this, bear in mind, if you do that, you're looking for them anywhere in the country. You have to go into the all record sets and then click 1881 census and do it that way. And just put the place and rough date of birth in and then follow them up. So I did that, and I did follow the two Lucys up. I admittedly didn't spend a lot of time doing that, but they don't look very likely. But again, as a technique, it works. And the next thing would be to try Anna's and Hannah's, and hope her birthplace is right. The thing is, if you can't find somebody, the chances are you're either not looking in the right place, or you're not looking using the right base information.
Yeah.
So really all you can do is try altering one element of that base information, the Christian name, the surname, the date, the place, one at a time, and hoping that you'll catch them using the other bits of information. The problem comes when you're looking and two of those bits of base information are wrong, and then you really, that's when it gets really difficult. But because she's Lucy, I wouldn't have tried that if she'd been, actually I probably would have tried it if she'd been Mary or Elizabeth, but I wouldn't have tried it if she was Mary or Elizabeth born in Plymouth, because it would just be too many. But that's a technique you can try.
That's, yeah, I'm interesting hearing the approach you took with the censuses there as well. If you've got an unusual name, an unusual first name or something, and well, I guess Lucy isn't the most unusual surname, but if you know for a fact where the place of birth is, you're searching for all women under that name born in that time. I've not tried that before. I'll certainly be giving that a go. I've also had some success as well looking for the more unusually named sibling. I had an ancestor who was called Thomas Cox. Good luck with that. There's thousands of them, but he had a brother who had the name Skews, Skewes, which is a name I've never come across before. Skews Cox was very, very easy to find. So yeah, no, those are some great pieces of advice. Thanks very much for that. Let's have a look at another question, then I'll take a look at some of the comments. So the next one is from Sue. So Sue has found 2 William Fletchers in Plymouth, both born in Paddington, London. Obviously must have resettled to Plymouth. One married Elizabeth Maria Matthews in 1907 and had William James, and the other William James Fletcher. And gave birth to William James Fletcher in 1908. The other married Elizabeth Bailey and had 2 sons in 1899 and 1901. One of them was a rogue and in and out of prison. But how do I find out which one it was? Any advice would be helpful. Thank you. That's interesting.
Well, the first thing that we did consider was that this actually might be the same William Fletcher marrying twice, because you don't actually have to have killed your first wife off in order to set up a second marriage and have a second family. But it doesn't appear to be the case in this particular instance. And this was one of Sue's hard work here. She says, I think you can be certain that the rogue is the William who was in the Royal Marines and married to Elizabeth Bailey. But she hadn't found that marriage, and I don't know where the Sue, the inquirer, had got it from. But William's Royal Marine Service record gives the answer. At the moment, this can be downloaded for free from the National Archives. I don't know how much longer that free access is going to be around, so I suggest that you do that quickly. And Sue says, although he started off with good or very good reports, something went awry and he was discharged in about 1902 because he'd been convicted of theft, and his general conduct is noted as bad. His description in the record also matches the height and colour of hair on the 1910 entry in the Plymouth prison record. His date of birth doesn't match his age on the 1901 census or the prison record exactly, but given the above evidence, she's pretty convinced that he is the rogue.
That's a great piece of detective work, matching up the physical descriptions as well. I love that.
She's done well with that. And I think too, particularly prison records or institutional records, often things like ages start to slip a little bit. People give approximate ages. And if you get an age that ends in a 0 or a 5, I'd be particularly suspicious of it, because people are rounding up and down. There's more, if you look at a census, for example, or there are more than a tenth of people with ages ending in 0. And
wow.
Because people are guessing. How old is he? Well, you don't guess at 59, do you? You guess, oh, he's about 60. Nobody says he's about 59. And so again, I don't know what the age was in this record because I didn't do this bit, but if it ends in a 0 in particular, or possibly in a 5, could be an estimate.
Yeah, there are certain resources you've got to remember that the information you're reading is only as reliable as the person who provided it. Yeah, and I guess the same goes for military records. You know, many people lied about their ages to make sure they were eligible for service. So yeah, always take things like that with a pinch of salt. Great. Well, actually, we'll do one more question before we take a look at the comments. So this one was sent in by Karen, who said, I cannot find any trace of a birth or baptism for my second great-grandmother, Ellen Washington, born circa 1842 in Plymouth. I came across her firstly on the 1871 census as follows: living at 2 Coburg Lane, St Andrew, Devon. Relationship, there was a boarder, George J. Legg. Oh, she was a boarder with the Legg family: George J. Legg, Philippa J. Legg, Samuel E. Legg. There was a load of Leggs in that household. I'm married to a Michael Riley on the 18th of October 1874 in Devonport. Any help would be greatly appreciated. So just to recap, she's desperately trying to find a birth or baptism for an Ellen Washington born in 1842, Plymouth, Devon.
Yes, I mean, the first thing to say that in the census where she has got her, and presumably on the marriage to Michael Riley, she appears to be unmarried, but don't always accept that that is necessarily true, because she could be a Mrs. Washington. That doesn't appear to be the case in this instance, and we hadn't got access to a marriage certificate, but it sounds as if, who is it, Caron, whose inquiry this is, has got access to that. And if not, the marriage to Michael Riley is in Devonport in 1874. If you haven't got the marriage certificate, that's what you need to do, because that should give a few more details. For example, with luck, it will give a father's name and an occupation, and maybe the witnesses will be useful as well. But it doesn't appear to be a Devon name. There's a baptism in Brighton in 1841 of an Ellen Eliza, a daughter of James and Martha, but absolutely nothing in Devon. And again, you've got a coastline joining Devonport and Brighton, so maybe that's not such a daft idea, particularly if she moved as a small child. She may have believed she'd been born in Plymouth, even though she was actually born in Brighton. But that doesn't explain why we can't find her in, say, the 1851 census. There's a lot of non-conformist baptisms that have recently gone on to Findmypast for the Plymouth area, and I think that there might be some more to come, so it might be worth checking back from time to time to see if she turns up in one of those. But there's no penalty for not registering a birth. I mean, you were supposed to do it, but you weren't fined or anything until the 1870s. So people, particularly people who've got a fairly itinerant lifestyle, did get away without registering births in some manner.
And I think not a lot of people realise that. I think, people think, if they were born post 1837, they should be in there somewhere.
Well, they should be in there somewhere. And this idea, at one point, everyone was sort of touting the idea that, it wasn't compulsory. It wasn't enforced until, I think it's 1874. And actually, I think the number that are missed has been exaggerated over the years, but it is still the case that there are some that are missing. The other thing, of course, is that you can register a birth without a Christian name, so it might just be female Washington, but there aren't any Washingtons in this case. But in other cases, that's worth looking for as a male or a female. Often they are children that are very sickly, and you'll find a corresponding death in the same quarter, but not always. Sometimes they just couldn't make up their mind that we're going to call them. So there are some online trees which mention an Alfred and a Martha as possible parents, but who knows where that came from. She does appear to be Ellen E. Washington. So we tried that technique of looking. Ellen born in Plymouth is not the same as looking for Lucy born in Topsham, because you've got a more common Christian name and you've got a much bigger place. But if you consider Ellen E, then that does look a little bit more possible. So you can have a look. There are a few Ellen E's of the right age in the 1851 and 1861 censuses with completely different surnames. and it's a lot of work, but you might want to follow some of those up. Are they still around in the 1871 census? If so, well, it's definitely not then, and see if you can find some more. So, I mean, she does seem quite convinced that she was born in Plymouth, this Ellen, but it is possible that that's just not the case. So if you haven't got the marriage certificate, get the marriage certificate. Maybe put in quite a bit of spade work researching all the LNEs of the right age that are in Plymouth, or wait and see if some more records come on stream that might bring up a non-conformist baptism.
Yeah, I think that's always worth bearing in mind. And I'm not just saying this in relation to Findmypast. New records are coming online every day of a wide variety of websites. It sounds a little cheesy, but every new day is a better day than the previous day to do your family history research, because there's more chances to find something. So yeah, just because you can't find something now, don't give up. Try back in a couple of months, and the missing piece of the puzzle may have eventually been online somewhere. Before we move on to the next one of the pre-submitted questions, I think Guy Lee, who's watching Cloudy Essex, submitted a question which I thought could just kind of lead to a little bit more of an open-ended discussion. So Guy said, one of my ancestors was working as a painter in Devonport Dockyard in 1816. He specifically asked if there were any archives for the dockyard for that period and where they were located. But that made me think, actually, do you have any tips for, so say you're wanting to discover basic occupational records, you're wanting to learn more about what your ancestor did for work, but pre-1841, I mean, even 1841, 1840, 1851 can fall short when you're looking, basically early occupational records. If you want to find out what your ancestors were doing for a living, where's a good place to look?
Well, actually, one of the later queries does relate to the apprenticeship tax records, which are on indexed on Findmypast. So I'll mention that in that context. In fact, I can answer his specific question.
Oh, really?
Purely because I also have an ancestor who worked in Devonport Dockyard at that period, and the records are extremely good, and they're at the National Archives. Okay. So that's where you need to go. But they're actually better for the very sort of late 18th, early 19th century than they are for later in the 19th century. There seems to be a bit more detail. It's a long time since I used them, but they're definitely there and definitely worth looking at, particularly as you've got a specific date to start there. But often occupational records are at the National Archives, so particularly we're thinking of armed forces and that kind of thing. They're going to be there. You might want to be looking at trade records, guild records, apprenticeship records, that kind of thing, not just the tax records, and often for somewhere like Plymouth, they will be held probably, well, they'd be in the box now, I guess, as a repository. But it is hard to get occupations once you fall off the census certificate era.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got a will, that helps, or maybe even a land record, very early newspapers, perhaps. Criminal records is another one where you'll get an occupation. It may not be where you want to find them, but
not the occupation you were hoping to discover, but
well, no, that's true. But, yeah, so there are cases where it will turn up, or land leases and things, but it's not so easy to track down what they were doing.
An open mind is very important. And yeah, the National Archives Discovery website I always find is a fantastic reference. If you're struggling to find anything on Findmypast, Ancestry, wherever you're doing your research, definitely check the National Archives website. Always worth a look. Cool. So we'll move on to another question. So this is from Linda. So Linda, nice short question. Linda said, I'm looking to find out where my great-grandparents, William and Mary Hockin, so that's Hockin, are buried. They lived in Holsworthy. William was the village blacksmith. Appreciate any help at all with the Hockin family.
Right, well, we didn't actually have any dates to work from here, although, presuming Linda is, of a certain age and is alive now, and it's her great-grandparents, we had a bit of an idea. And because it's a small place, we found them on the census quite easily. So William the blacksmith with his family living in Holsworthy, and he was born in Pyeworthy about 1864. So to be sure of his death registration, we actually had to confirm that he appeared to have a middle name of Robbins, and the GRO birth registration and his parents' marriage confirmed that this is William the blacksmith. And he marries a Mary Jane Wonnacott in 1885 in Holsworthy Registration District. We've got them in the censuses, and that's not the question. The question is, where were they buried? So there's a death registration for William R. Hocking in Holsworthy District in 1932, age 69. So that all tied in rather nicely. And in the GRO website, actually, the same entry has been expanded to actually read William Robbins Hocking. So if you've been using something like FreeBMD or the birth, marriage and death registers via Findmypast, it might be worth looking at the GRO website as well, because you might get some extra information. Now, we haven't got the burial records for something as late as 1932 online yet, but at our research centre at Tree House in Exeter, we have got microfiche for those burial registers, and Sue has been going in. We're just starting to reopen for pre-booked visitors. So she was able to look for that, and he is definitely buried in the parish churchyard in Holsworthy. And then she turned to looking at the newspapers on Findmypast and put in William Hocking Holsworthy, and there is an in memoriam notice which you can see on the screen there. And so it doesn't tell you where he's buried, but it all ties up nicely and a little bit more information. But it also threw up an earlier newspaper report which suggests that the family worshipped at the Methodist Church. You have to omit the Robbins to get that, because it was just down as William Hocking in Holsworthy. So it looks like William is buried in Holsworthy. But what about his wife? Well, his wife is in the 1939 register, available on Findmypast, and she appears to be visiting her sister, who is an Emily Bailey, in Lostwithiel. And by doing a bit more research, we find that Mary Jane Wonnacott and Emily Wonnacott are daughters of John and Harriet, and they're baptised in the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, and we have transcriptions for that on Findmypast. And the birth registration of Emily's daughter confirms that her maiden name was Wonnacott, so it all ties up neatly, although Sue did point out that the transcription on Findmypast didn't bring Mary Jane up. She went elsewhere to get that 1939 register entry. There's only one death registration that seems to fit with Mary Jane's birth date, and there's no evidence for getting married again. She's checked the burial registers in Holsworthy right up to 1955, which is as late as we have access to. And the death she has found is a Mary J. Hocking, age 90, but it's in Surrey. Okay. Now, it's probably worth the death certificate to see if that is her. There doesn't seem to be another possibility. And maybe one of her children moved to Surrey, and that's what she's doing in Surrey. So that would be as far as we can go. And I would guess that if she died in Surrey, probably she wouldn't be brought back to Holsworthy for burial. And anyway, it's 1953 and she's not in the burial register up to 1955, so it looks as if she's buried elsewhere.
And actually, I think the fact that microfiche was used quite heavily there is another interesting point. Obviously not everything is online, and as you said, you hold quite a lot of microfiche at your research centre, Treehouse in Exeter. But to anyone watching who might be having similar issues in other parts of the country, it's always worth getting in touch with your local family history society. If you can't find a record online, those microfiches may well be sat in a research centre. Pretty much every county has one. You can go to the Federation of Family History Federation's website. They've got a great way, a list of all their member societies. Which will direct you to the websites and guide them there. But outside of Family History Society archives, I was wondering, are there any other places you could consult if you want to get your hands on some microfiche?
Well, the actual microfiche, this was done by the archives, by what's now the Southwest Heritage Centre, and then they made those available, and you could actually buy the microfiche for a particular parish from them. So that applied to Devon. That may not well not apply in other areas. But of course, many churches have still got their registers that they were using for this kind of date, because you're not obliged to hand them in until they're full. So particularly a small rural church, they can still be using a register that's 100 years old, because
wow, I didn't know that.
Register. What Devon Family History Society has had a program of doing over a number of years is tracking down these registers and offering to purchase a new register for that parish as long as they deposit the old one. So even though it's not full, you've got 50 more entries, that's going to take you 50 years before you bury 50 more people. Here's a lovely brand new register.
That's a great tactic.
Your old one. And so that's been going on for some time. And so that does help with Devon. So a lot more for Devon have been deposited than you might find in other areas. But yes, I mean, your local archives, your local history societies, your local family history societies are the first place to try. Or, of course, the churches themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Who are entitled to charge you. And there is a scale of fees for searching, although many churches will have a tame local historian in their pocket who they'll probably direct you to instead.
Well, a tame one, I like that. Great. So next question we've got is from Gillian. This is quite a big question, quite a long question, but
Yes.
So I think Gillian said, I've been unable to find any trace whatsoever of my great-grandfather, Robert Robbins. With a name like Robert Robbins, I'm not surprised, actually, before his marriage to Elizabeth Clogg, spelled with 2 G's, in Combe Martin in 1843. On later records, he is described variously as an assistant in a lime quarry, a lead miner, and a farmer and quarryman, and his birthplace is consistently recorded as Beer Alston, Devon. There's variations of spellings at different times for the location. From his marriage certificate, I know that his father was William Robbins, a miner. I would love to locate Robert on the 1841 census, and also to find a baptism record for him in the Beer Alston, Beer Ferreras area. He would have been born around 1815. So, what have you been able to find on that?
Well, this is a kind of story of two halves, really. I think I've found him in the 1841 census. I think he's mining in Bodmin, and the 1841 census image, of course, is on Findmypast, and it does say that he was not born in Cornwall, so that ties in rather nicely. And of course, Robbins, we're looking at Robbins with 1 B and 2 B's and so on when we're trying to find him. And I think there's his.
That's him on the 1841 census.
So I believe that's him. There is quite a lot of crossover between particularly the farther west areas of Devon and the Cornish mining, particularly once the Great Consul's mine in the Tavistock area started to fail. The miners went all over the place. And if you like being down a hole in the ground, that's what trade you take with you. So we think we found the census. So that was the good news. We can't find a likely baptism for Robert Robbins, spelling it however you like, anywhere within the vicinity of Beerferrers. Again, you're looking at a border parish. You've got the River Tamar, and then there's nice little Cornish parishes over the other side. And there was a lot of river traffic backwards and forwards, so you do need to look at Cornwall as well. But what there is in the Beerferrers marriage registers that are on Findmypast is a marriage for a William and a Catherine Robbins. And she is called Robbins. It's William Robbins marrying a Catherine Robbins. Neither of them are settled in the parish. They're both described as sojourners, so that implies that they perhaps come from somewhere else, which is annoying. The witnesses don't appear to be relevant, which is also annoying. But given that we do know that the father is meant to be called William and that they definitely think they're born in this area, this looks really likely as the parents. But we are missing the vital baptism. So I thought, well, if we can find this William Robbins in the census and he's a minor, which is what I believe it said on the marriage certificate, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? But no, we can't, because he dies in 1834. How annoying. But I did find Catherine in Beerferrers, and although in a way you're always told with family history, start with what you know and work back, sometimes if you've got a theory, you do have to run with it for a little while and explore around it to either decide that it's not going to hold water or decide that yes, this is what you want. Now, this William and Catherine Robbins have a daughter called Jane. She's baptised in Beerferrers in 1814, but that particular baptism record says that the family are of Veryan in Cornwall.
Oh, I know Veryan. Yeah, my great uncle lived in Veryan.
Well, unfortunately, though, there's no baptism for Robert in Veryan either. There is a nonconformist baptism for William, son of William, a miner of Beer Alston, and Catherine in Beerferrers in 1817, and it's on Findmypast. Annoyingly, he's buried in Beerferrers in 1817, but there's still no Robert. And a normal technique would be, particularly as the marriage was in 1814 and the approximate birth date is 1815, is to consider that it's an illegitimate birth and he's been baptised with the maiden name of the mother. Well, the maiden name of the mother is Robbins, so we would still have found it in this particular instance. But if she'd been Catherine something else, then I'd have been looking for the baptism of Robert, whatever that maiden name happened to be. So we had another look for Catherine. She's in the 1841 census in Beerferrers with another child called William. Well, of course, no relationships are given, but the implication is that they've replaced the William who was buried in 1817, and he's given as 15. Well, of course, that could mean he was 19, but because the ages are rounded down. And there is actually a likely baptism for him in Redruth in 1824, the son of William a miner and Catherine of Gwenap. They are moving round the mining areas of mostly North Cornwall. So okay. I think this is where we're losing Robert, and it may well be that he was never baptised. It also appears that the family are nonconformist. So again, you're more likely to lose a baptism. There's a likely burial for William Senior in Redruth. Sorry, I said 1834. It's 1831. That index it's on the Cornwall OPC database, and you've got that in index form on Findmypast. But if you then go to the Cornwall OPC website, their full transcription adds that William Senior died of consumption, and that detail's not on the index record that Findmypast have got. So once you've found it on Findmypast, it is worth looking further. And of course, the original record would be better still, but they're not online. So the bottom line is it's highly likely that William and Catherine are Robert's parents. Whether you'll ever be able to confirm that, I don't know. It may be difficult or impossible to find out anything further. The only thing that you might do if you found a descendant of another child of William and Catherine is to see if they're a DNA match, because it's recent enough that may show up. Not definitely, but it may. It would be a case of, if you didn't match, don't rule it out. But to me, that if I got that DNA match, that would be the additional piece of evidence that I think would tip it for me that you've got the right parents there, even without a baptism.
Yeah, and a great piece of advice. The DNA tests aren't just great for giving you an indication of where your genetic origins may lie. If there is a match out there, that can be incredibly helpful. The other thing I took away from what you said then that I thought was very interesting was the fact that they were moving around these mining towns, obviously in search of work. So it's always worth bearing in mind that your ancestors' occupation can dictate where they may have gone to. So yeah, if your ancestors were miners and they're missing, find out where the other big collieries in the region were. But I guess that could apply to loads of different occupations. Like I think last time we spoke, we talked about the fact that being quite a maritime county, a lot of same for the mining industry, but a lot of people from Devon actually ended up emigrating overseas to North America, Canada, to Australia, in search of work. So yeah, that's also very much worth remembering.
Yeah, there's also significant emigration from the Tavistock area mines and just over the Cornish border to Northumberland in the
really?
1870s. I think it's 1870s, early 1880s, because there was a strike in Northumberland and they actively targeted the Devon Cornwall miners, basically to go up there as strike breakers. So they all end up in Cramlington. So that's another hidden place for miners.
Well, it shows the importance of kind of researching the context of the times through which your ancestors lived. I mean, beyond newspapers, what would you have any other advice for kind of finding little pieces of information like that could inform your search?
It's experience.
Experience.
It's other people's knowledge, and shamelessly use other people's experience and knowledge, be they people from a family history society or a local history society. And that's something that we're finding with these little parish chats that we're organising. And actually, we've got one coming up that's going to cover beer ferrers. And that ideally, we don't always manage it. We get someone in the room, and there's usually a couple of dozen of us, who really knows the background to that area. And that's the sort of information they will have. And so by trying to find out more about the place and the history and the context, that's often the clues that you're going to want.
Well, quite a few people are agreeing with you in the comments, saying how invaluable local knowledge is and getting an understanding of that. And, what better way of getting that than speaking to your local family history society, attending online talks, or maybe visiting a drop-in centre, or even better, becoming a member. Well, brilliant. We're near the end, I think. If you don't mind, Sue, should we look at one more?
Yes, but can we do? Well, I wanted to talk about the apprenticeship index. Can we do the Philip Harris one?
We certainly can. Yeah. So I will just dig that up now.
Even though it's not a success story, there's a couple of things that I think in that one that we haven't yet covered. So do you want to summarise?
Yeah, so this was from Susan. So she said Philip Harris lived in London, born 1786. Census records state that he was born in Collerton, Devon, and his father Philip was a mariner. I can't find a birth certificate for him in Collerton, but there's a record, baptism, I think, for Philip Harris in Crediton in 1786. I'm stuck and don't know where to go next. So it sounds like you may do.
Well, we this is not going to end well, but there's some techniques on the way that I think are useful. So to begin with, I don't know how experienced a researcher Susan is, or maybe she's not in this country, but there will be no birth certificate at that date because our birth certificates don't start until the 1st of July 1837. So you're going to be relying on other records to find Philip's parents, primarily, of course, a baptism. So in the 1851 census, which of course is available on Findmypast, he's living in Westminster, and it confirms that Philip was a master brass worker. And it says he was born about 1786 in Colaton in Devon. So that's probably Collerton with a double L, which is part of Paignton at the time when he would have been baptized. But it also could be Collyton with a Y or Corryton with an I. He does survive to the 1861 census, but hopefully he just says he's born in Devonshire. So do be aware that, particularly when you moved out of area, that birthplace names, when you're giving it to an enumerator who's not familiar with Devonshire place names because they're in Westminster, is going to garble them. Now, I'm not totally convinced that that if he was the one baptized in Crediton and he said Crediton, that the enumerator is going to make Collerton out of it. I think that's unlikely. If it was the other way round, I would have slightly different feelings, because an enumerator away might have heard of Crediton because it's a much bigger place, but probably hasn't heard of Collerton. So you're more likely to get an obscure place corrupted into a bigger place than you are the other way round. So that's the first point. But because he's a master brass worker, I thought, he would have undergone an apprenticeship. Let's look at the index to British county apprentices from 1710 to 1808 on Findmypast, but he's not there. And the reason may be that this is a tax list, a list of apprenticeship premiums that were taxed. And so if there was no premium paid, there's no tax due. So they're not on the list. And if you were apprenticed to your father or your grandfather or your uncle, you're not going to be paying yourself a premium. So there would be, you're still apprenticed, but there's no premium, so there's no tax, so you're not on the list. But it's a good place to look, and also for occupations, as we were mentioning earlier. Now, and I suspect this is where Susan has got the fact that the father is Philip Harris, a mariner, because Philip Harris Jr., the one that she's particularly interested in, marries twice. And although he marries the first time before 1837, his second marriage is in 1850. And so therefore there's a marriage certificate which gives a father's name. So again, you may not be descended from that second marriage, but get that certificate, because that's going to give you extra detail. And in fact, we didn't have to buy a certificate in that particular case. The image was on Ancestry. Now, the credit and baptism, son of Philip and Mary, it kind of fits, except the place is wrong. And it's available on Findmypast, and you've got to think a little bit. Again, it's context, it's local knowledge. Crediton is about 30 to 35 miles from all those possible Colliton places. Crediton is in inland. So I'll be quite cautious about that baptism without further evidence. Because if his father really was a mariner, why is he in Crediton? And it's not impossible. Maybe that was where the mother came from and they went back there. I don't know. I mean, I did think it was worth looking at that family a little bit. Philip Harris, a resident of this parish, marries a Mary Cole. So these are the possible parents in Crediton in 1785. That image is on Findmypast. But there is quite a likely baptism for that Philip Senior in Crediton in 1755. So I'm thinking, does this look like a mariner? Well, I'm still not convinced. But there was also a possible burial in Stoke Damerel in 1820, and a possible burial for Mary in 1793 in Stoke Damerel. And that particular burial leads back to a possible baptism in Crediton. But there's no children for Philip and Mary in Stoke Damerel, whether it's the same Philip and Mary as the Crediton one or a different Philip and Mary. Remembering, again, we're not dealing with a particularly uncommon surname here. I mean, if the Crediton Philip and Mary do move to Stoke Damerel, then that's much more likely as a location for a mariner. The problem is they could have gone there via somewhere else, and it won't necessarily be in Devon. And that could be where this missing baptism is. So the other thing to do, of course, if you've got a possible baptism like this Crediton one, is to try and rule it out by finding the Crediton Philip Harris baptized in 1786 doing something else, and doing something else that clearly means he's not the one you want. Bearing in mind that people do marry two people at the same time, people do appear in censuses more than once, but and there is no obvious alternative future for that Crediton Philip Harris. So I have reservations about it, but it's still in the frame, and that's as far as we were really able to take this. So I'm sorry it's not a solution. There's perhaps more work to do. I tried guild records and things, but there doesn't seem to be anything appropriate for brass workers in London. The Guildhall Library would be the obvious place to investigate a little bit further on that one. So kind of not exactly a success story, but we tried all sorts of things that might have worked and might work with a similar inquiry that someone else might have. But I wouldn't be inking this in, I'm afraid, at the moment, if it was my family tree.
Well, that's still incredibly useful to hear, because I think, judging by some of the comments we've had lots of people, by the way, saying how interesting and helpful this has been. Is these are all valuable kind of processes and tips that you can apply yourself to your own research. Yeah, that's a tricky one. But I think one of the great things that's been showcased over the past, hour or so that we've been talking is with the quite limited amount of information you've had for every single one of these, the amount of depth you've been able to go into, and all the different avenues you've pursued. So for everybody watching, if you needed further proof of the kind of experience and expertise that's on tap through your local society, I think this probably is it. We've had quite a few people as well asking if they did if they were to kind of tune into the kind of things you mentioned before, like the parish chats, some of the online sessions. How would apart from visiting the website and registering interest, what would be the best way to go about that?
If you go to the website www.devonfhs.org.uk, there is details there of how to access our virtual meetings. You have to join a MailChimp mailing list to be sent the links. There is also information about our research centre at Tree House, which is running a virtual research service at the moment. You can request virtual help because our volunteers are able to go in now, and they will arrange a Zoom call with you, and then you can chat through your problem, or you can do it by email or some other way. So we are offering that wherever you happen to be. We do also do our own brick wall sessions. We've got one coming up in July, which actually isn't very far away, even though it feels like about February outside, and one in August. They're two of our sessions, and we will be asking people to submit brick walls in the way that people have done today, and we will be picking a selection of those to work on in a very similar way as we've done today, and trying to solve those, and perhaps choose ones that will give people ideas. Even if we don't do their brick wall, some of the things that we will say will be things that they can try for themselves. So that's coming up in the next 2 or 3 months.
Smashing. Well, you heard it, folks. There's the link at the bottom of the screen. Visit the site, and even if you don't have, even if your ancestors aren't from Devon, and if you've got ancestors in the UK, there will be. I'm sure there will be a local society that will be more relevant to your own research. So yeah, I think one of the main takeaways from this is get in touch. There's a well of knowledge there that you'd be really missing out if you didn't tap into. Just the contextual stuff that's come up today has been fascinating, and I don't even have Devon ancestors. But no, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thanks very much, Janet. I can tell that our viewers have watched as well. Lots of people saying how useful and helpful and interesting this has been. Massive thanks to everybody who tuned in. I think we could have easily gone for another few hours, but sorry to everybody whose questions we didn't get to live. But thanks again for sending them in. And I think I've thoroughly enjoyed this myself. I hope we can expect to maybe see you on here again in the not too distant future. Well, I think we may have lost signal there, but it doesn't matter because we're pretty much at the end. So yeah, I think I'm gonna bid you all a very fond farewell. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've loved it. I can see you've enjoyed it too. And we will see you again in the not too distant future. Before I go one last time, just so you don't forget, anybody who does want to get in touch, there's the link to the Devon Family History website, Devon Family History Society website. Also, if you've got Devon ancestors and you haven't started searching yet, you can check out our own Devon Family History collection page, which will give you an overview of all the different society records we've published in partnership with the hardworking volunteers at Devon FHS. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks, Janet. Thank you to all of you who tuned in. Stay safe, stay in touch, and we will see you again very soon. Bye now. Bye-bye.